Greetings, Culture Warriors. It's Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything and the host of this podcast, Dispatches from the Front. Today's dispatch, we're going to take a look at a little bit of a kerfuffle over an ad that a major company had and see how that plays with regard to that company's culture. This is from U.S. News & World Report, May 20th, 2020. Headline is, VW pulls car ad after outcry, apologizes for racist overtone. Subtitled, Germany's Volkswagen has pulled a social media ad for a new car and apologized after an outcry over its racist overtones. This is originally from the Associated Press. Germany's Volkswagen has pulled a social media ad for a new car and apologized after an outcry over its racist overtones. The 10-second spot posted on Instagram and Twitter shows a massive white hand pushing a black man away from beside a new yellow Volkswagen Golf parked on the street, then moving him to an open doorway and flicking him inside a French cafe. Commentators on social media also noted that as the German language slogan, Der neue Golf, my German is abysmal, I'm sorry, the new Golf, fades into view, the jumble of letters can be read as a racial slur for a brief moment. And the cafe's name is Petit Colon, which in French literally means the little colonist. Volkswagen told the Associated Press on Wednesday that the video has been pulled and that we can understand the outrage and anger. Without question, the video is inappropriate and tasteless, Volkswagen wrote. We will clarify how something like this could happen, and there will be consequences. The Wolfsburg-based automaker, founded under the Nazis to produce the People's Car, said that given its history, it has always sought to position itself against all forms of racism, xenophobia, and discrimination. Many initiatives in this company and in our global workforce promote diversity, integration, and unprejudiced cooperation, Volkswagen said. That makes it all the more annoying that we made this mistake. Okay, what to say about this? It's true that because of the origins of the company, the Volkswagen has had to work overtime in the court of public opinion to make up for it. In the book, we talk about the importance of the founding myth, how many great companies that stand the test of time have a founding myth that represents the values of that company. In the case of Volkswagen, which was begun in wartime Germany in order to provide cheap transportation for the masses, because so much of the production capacity was going toward building Tiger tanks to send to the Eastern and Western fronts. For that, and as you can imagine, there was a pretty significant propaganda campaign that went along with the launch of the Volkswagen, which tied the company from its inception to the values of the National Socialist Party in Germany, the Nazis. After Germany lost the war, and when the full extent of Nazi evil became apparent through the Nuremberg tribunals, that baggage, you would think, would have crushed the company. That Volkswagen would have been a post-war casualty, or at least been rebranded. It was probably saved by the tensions of the Cold War and the fact that West Germany needed an industrial revolution, and the West in general viewed Germany as kind of a proving ground for the advantages of their system of government over that of the communists. So Germany, in the wake of the end of World War II, really became a new type of battlefield wherein two completely incompatible systems of government could show the rest of the world why theirs was the superior system. That probably saved Volkswagen, but of course you still have to deal with the fact that companies which were closely tied to the Nazi regime had to somehow repudiate that in the eyes of the post-war world, at least in the West. Moreover, Germany had long had a history of its largest and most successful companies and the families which ran them being closely tied into the government. If you go back 2 generations before World War II, you see this in the tie between originally the Prussian and then the German government, and Krupp. Krupp, K-R-U-P-P, was the leading German arms manufacturer and a major company in the Ruhr, the industrial heartland of Germany, for the production of steel. And Krupp was very closely tied to Prussian militarism for this reason. The ideology of that Germany should have the best weapons, the strongest army, and therefore be able to set their destiny as a nation. You have to remember that Germany is a late creation on the national stage. Like Italy, Germany used to refer largely to an ethnicity in a region where you had many small nations. So Prussia, while fairly large, was still smaller than Germany as it is today. It was basically the northern part. And so under Otto von Bismarck, Germany began to vie for great power status, and Krupp was a big part of the technological superiority on the battlefield that made that happen. Their coming out party, if you will, was during the Franco-Prussian War, shortly after the American Civil War, where the Prussians were able to invade and conquer a good slice of France, forcing the French to surrender. Of course, this would be repeated largely during World War I, and Krupp would be a major player in arming the Germans during that war. As a matter of fact, a big focus of the Versailles Treaty was to prevent the ability of companies like Krupp to continue to be the arsenal of Germans and Prussian militarism. So that's kind of the milieu in which Volkswagen came about. It was an attempt to, through the auto industry, kind of replicate what had been earlier done in the arms industry. So given that pedigree, it's perhaps more shocking that something like this ad could happen. The description as given has several kind of tells that probably should have been caught by anyone who truly held the values of diversity, integration, unprejudiced cooperation within Volkswagen. It's awfully hard to see anyone in the production and editorial pipeline for these kind of advertisements to have been unaware of the implications of such content. Why was it necessary to have the hand pushing the black man away from the Gulf be white? Why was it necessary for the man being pushed away to be black? Why was it necessary to flick him inside a French cafe? Think about the symbology behind that, given what I just told you about the Franco-Prussian War and World War II, World War I, all fought between Germany and France. And with French territory as a major battlefield in all three wars. And that's before you look deeper into history and you get into the Napoleonic conflict, you get into the 7 Years' War, which we experienced as the French and Indian War in America. And you see kind of a drumbeat of animosity between Germany and its neighbor, France. The German people long viewed the French as preventing them from forming a nation in the first place, and then trying to destroy them as a nation once formed. That's not really true, but that is the German perspective on things. And so flicking him into a French cafe is kind of fraught with meaning. The fact that the cafe was named the Little Colonist, which is pretty similar to an epithet that was applied to Napoleon, a French emperor and who had conquered Germany and formed the Confederation of the Rhine after defeating the Prussians and the Austrians at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805. He was known as the Little Corporal because he had come up through the ranks. Of course, the Little Corporal itself, that has some resonance going back to World War II with Adolf Hitler. Because Adolf Hitler during World War I had won the Iron Cross, a very prestigious medal in the German military, for bravery when he was a corporal. And so in the Allied propaganda in World War II, it was common to refer to Hitler by his former military rank of corporal, and then by his family name before it was changed to Hitler, which was Schicklgruber. So they would refer to Adolf Hitler as Corporal Schicklgruber as a way to kind of demythologize this notion of the man as the father of Germany. So you have all these little threads pulled through that make you think, well, that wasn't put in there by accident. That was put in there to send precisely the message that people received and are objecting to. Bear in mind also that French colonial history, which by my reference to the French and Indian War, included North America. We made the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon because France had a wide swath of territory, largely supporting the fur industry in Canada and in the territory that's now the United States. But France also had a later colonial experience in Africa, especially in North Africa, and that continued well through the Second World War and into the post-war period, where you had some pretty significant revolutions going on in Algeria and elsewhere. You might also remember that the American experience in Vietnam began after Ho Chi Minh defeated the French in what was then French Indochina, which we know as Vietnam. That had been a French colony. And indeed, American involvement there started as part of an agreement between the French and Americans as we tried to cement France's involvement in NATO. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization had just formed. We wanted the French to play a part in it and help fund it. They were reluctant. And so initially, getting involved in French Indochina to try and get the colony back for them, essentially, was part of the deal to have them play an active role in NATO. So the French colonial involvement is lurking in the background here as well. Those of you who may remember the most famous French fighting force, the French Foreign Legion, that was comprised largely of people from the French colonies, and they fought typically in the French colonies. So France has a kind of long and very checkered history of colonialism. Having the cafe be named the Little Colonist resonates with all that. The fact that Volkswagen itself in German means people's car also ties it with German nationalism to a large extent. And so you can see how all of this bubbling beneath the surface really undermines the notion that this was a mistake or accidental on the part of the creators, who had to make at every juncture choices, creative choices. And when all those creative choices kind of line up in the same direction, then I don't think there's any doubt that those creators made those choices with that direction in mind. It didn't just fall into place. And it says something about the culture as lived at Volkswagen that those involved with this effort, who you would usually expect to be very sensitive to the perception of the company and what image is being projected, especially given Volkswagen's need to repudiate their founding in order to maintain the goodwill of their customers. And yet this ad still got produced and still got released. No one in that food chain associated with the production of this ad saw it as a mistake, saw it as something to be rejected, to be put aside, to be questioned. Not one. And so when they refer to it as kind of annoying and saying there will be consequences, I would keep an eye on that. If you don't see a follow-up story indicating clearly who was involved in this decision-making, if you don't see clear consequences for those involved, if you don't see an effort, frankly, to kind of clean house around this and to move forward, then I would have to think that you would have to presume that Volkswagen culture as lived is quite different from the culture that they're communicating to promote diversity, integration, unprejudiced cooperation. That last phrase too, boy, given all the history involved here, um, one thing about the German language is it's pretty precise. They have these long, compound words and phrases that are designed to deliver that kind of precision. Say exactly what you mean. And when you say unprejudiced cooperation in this context, that's not the same thing as collaboration. It's not the same thing as openness. It's not the same thing as what Jack Welch at GE used to call boundarylessness. It's not the same thing as we would call, diversity and that sort of thing. Unprejudiced cooperation, there's a hint of the iron hand in the velvet glove there. Because of course we all know that cooperation can and has been in the past coerced. And it's just an interesting choice of word. Prejudice, of course, is a bit nicer way of saying bigotry. A bit nicer way of saying racism. So there's a slightly cleaned up bias in there. If your value is that we work together regardless of race, creed, or any of the other things which may separate us as people, but which are not relevant to the work that we're doing, there are probably other ways to say it that don't have all the baggage that unprejudiced cooperation carries. But I think to find those ways, you have to be kind of honestly pursuing the right values here. And I think in this case, people have some legitimate question as to whether Volkswagen as a company and the people that comprise leadership at all levels, by the time it gets into your public face, my goodness, you can only imagine what the engineers back in the conference room are saying, right? So one would hope that this was truly simply a confluence of improbable events and people's honest naivete. World War II was a long time ago. I doubt that there's probably anyone at Volkswagen today who was old enough to have played any part whatsoever in it, if they even remember it. Certainly, the culture of Germany has changed significantly since the end of the war, in the Potsdam Conference there. So, one would hope that this was truly just an unfortunate accident and that the sheer weight of all that history, while a fact, was not really the driver here. That said, as readers of the book will know, cultures are hard to stamp out completely. They are very robust and long-lived things. And it takes active and constant effort to change a culture. No greater transformation than that undergone by the Axis powers following World War II. Not just Germany, but also in Italy, with its fascist dictator, also in Japan, with its emperor, and with Tojo as the modern-day shogun of that country during World War II. Those countries were pretty much remade utterly in the wake of it. But perhaps if you dig down deep enough, perhaps you still find some vestiges of that much older culture that haven't been uprooted and tossed on the pile. And I think that's what Volkswagen needs to be on guard for. So hopefully they'll do the right thing here. They'll dig into how this was able to happen, and they'll also consider, hey, what can we do going forward to ensure that we don't step on any of these cultural and historical landmines, which we may be oblivious to, but certainly our customers are not. Because at the end of the day, public relations and branding are one thing, but culture is everything. Thank you and have a great day.